Hi, I'm Colin Hambrook, editor of Disability Arts Online. I'm an older white man sporting stubble and wearing glasses and sitting in my home office. In our 10th artist presentation, Holly Norcop talks about her light and sound installation MediaStorm, created to reflect the saturation of data in contemporary life. Her presentation outlines some of the psychological theories that inspired the audio soundscape and how the piece explores the interaction between mental health and social media use from a neurodiverse perspective. She talks to camera and towards the end of her presentation shares an extract of the installation. Holly will be joined by her collaborator Richard Redwin for a live Q&A after her presentation. Richard supported the technical side of the work, syncing up the light and sound for MediaStorm. Send your questions via the Facebook or YouTube comments sections or the hashtag #DAOCOVIDCommissions.
Hello, I'm Holly Norcop and I'm a creative producer, a community artist and a creative impact evaluator, and I am in my late 20s. I'm a white woman, I've got blonde hair that I've put back into a ponytail, and I've got a blue and gold top on. I'm here today to talk about MediaStorm, which was a commission that I did last year for Art City, and it explored over a month sort of the process of a few different themes, mainly the interaction between social media and news feeds and our mental health. And as I am a neurodiverse artist, I've got dyspraxia, dyslexia, ADHD and lived experiences. It's through a neurodiverse lens that I was exploring what it meant to be human in the digital age, how to manage this influx of information when you're drawn into every direction at once because your attention isn't as regulated as typically as perhaps someone who hasn't got ADHD. And that's what this talk's going to be about today. So I was going to start by just sort of walking you through the process a little bit. So the context of the commission was Art City was a consortism, a group of art companies in Stoke-on-Trent in the Midlands in Staffordshire that wanted to put events and artists into disused spaces in Stoke-on-Trent, and their work accumulated into a conference at the end of their funding period last year in September. So one of the things that they wanted to do was they commissioned a poet called Montgomery, who is a public art poet, and he came in, and the first thing that he did was sort of get to know and understand the area from an outside perspective. Robert Montgomery has probably worked internationally. He's pretty established and lives in London and is from Scotland, Glasgow, I think. And his pieces that he did were big outdoor art installations of text, and he made a poem across about 8 segments at different areas of the city. And that was really good, I think, because Stoke-on-Trent is a polycentric city, meaning it's the only city in the country that is actually comprised of 6 towns in a banana shape. It doesn't have a centre. So these segments of poem could be caught and captured on their own, or they could be sort of put together. To respond to that work, the Art City commissioned local artists and gave each of them a single line. So right at the beginning of that process, as they were bringing this poet in to sort of look and understand the city, we were getting together in different groups of communities and hearing about sort of he was getting a feel for the area, I think. And I think that's a really interesting thing that I experienced quite quickly, was the idea that somebody else was coming into my hometown and hearing other people talk about my hometown. We don't, like, it's not an area where you'd see a lot of visitors, a lot of intended interest into it. It's quite post-industrial. It doesn't attract a massive amount of tourist trade. It's not particularly wealthy. So there was this external view that I hadn't heard of before, even though I'm like 5 generations from that city. And I think it moved me into responding into what words there should be for this city out of these conversations. And from that, the first thing that I did was sort of produce a poem that I'm going to read to you now. I've never done it before, so forgive me. But I think it's, for me, often the first step in a creative process is for me to create a poem, and then I'll go from there into audio, video, sculpture, the bottom of my bed, shoved in my pillowcase. Right, so let me just pop this poem up and I'll give you a quick reading. Someplace nowhere. All we do is scream into the static noise, which spits back the same faces, places, races, 60 languages spoken into the city, none heard, one heard. My own throat is choked on industrial rot, my eyes burn dry, blue-lit like promises of greener grass and rent prices I can't access. I'm tired, I whisper, into the teeming, streaming blur of faces, places and everyday wasters. I'm tired. My body is heaving, my lungs straining, limbs lethargic, slow and stupid, thick and fat. I can't remember if it was you or me who said that. Recently I've felt as though a pinch pop maker's arthritic fingers pushed their thumbs into my chest and compressed my ribcage until I am hollow. Tupperware to eat from, nothing posh. If I ever get out at all, it'll be through the factory shop. Damaged goods. Chip on my shoulder. Just about making it on a 3-day week, I sleep in my childhood bed and try not to choke on the hollow smile that arises as I bare my teeth at the Burberry pear and I say, nothing. Because we're all too busy, screaming into static noise and the unfounded hope that it will tell us that we matter, that within us is a single splatter of originality, of moral fibre, of something beyond this red brick reality, which squats uncomfortably, like the itch of dead skin against my feet. Where do I begin to explain that words for Stoke must come from the everyday pain of each brick being the same as the last? It is your task to stop. Find a sense of silence as we have grown deaf to the sound of our own screams, of 100,000 moments lost to unattainable daydreams. Like a child banging their fist against the glass, stop and search, freeze. Don't let the urgency pass. Harness the mundane, know its name. You are here to stop us drowning in red brick realities. Every pocket of sadness is a wild animal of childhood pain, as it cowers amongst the shadows of a street sign, or broken and tame, it now limps at our sides, invisible to an outsider's eyes. Yet I can still taste your apology in the rich red wine you buy, which rushes to my mind. Leave, and breathe bigger city air, and hope that your words broke through the static, someplace, nowhere. So that's a piece that I wrote. It was just me processing some thoughts around what kind of words would be appropriate to write for Stoke-on-Trent in the winter. It came from where I was feeling at the time. And as I sort of go back on that now, looking back on what was produced, I think like I can hear that there's certain influences that later went into the audio tracks that I created, the use of static, the use of repetition, the idea of red brick reality, loops, things being the same. And I think that again sort of feeds back into something that you might struggle with if you're somebody that's got well, if you're anybody really, like everybody needs newness, novelty, opportunity, for chance and change and learning. And I'm not saying that people in Stoke-on-Trent have less of that, and I'm not saying that I have less of that. That's just hopefully a universal need, that sometimes we can get a bit bored and we can get a bit stuck. And when you see somebody coming into your city and we're trying to talk the city up and show them that there's something beyond just perhaps the stuff that you might immediately see, which is like shut factories potentially, but there's also heritage, there's also stuff going on. There's kind of like a binary, there's kind of a duality of experiences, of trying to show them that there's something beyond like the poverty, and then also trying to show them that actually still this is a context, it's not easy, it's not like you could talk about this place as being a simple and easy and rich place to live in, essentially. And I think that struggle of the conversations between the two just led to a bit of emotion that I let out, and it's really helpful. So that's a poem, and it's the start of this thinking process. Now after that, Robert Montgomery moved away, and he sort of thought about it, and he created different pieces of work that you could see, and it's called Stoke Works. And if you go on the website Robert Montgomery, you'll see his pieces. I haven't included them here other than the one that I responded to, because I'm not sure how it works with like artist crediting, but I will send a link over to the Disability Arts Online if you want to check it out. So I get the word that Robert Montgomery's given out his lines to each of these artists and we're asked to respond to it. And my line is, the wires have gone into the air now. And I start thinking about sort of the loss of physical influence. Like when the phone was invented, you held it to your ear, and even though you could hear and speak to somebody from somewhere else around the planet, you still held it to your ear and then you put it down. Whereas the internet and social media and news, I was thinking about how that influences like the pace of life. Life feels very noisy sometimes when I'm looking across my social media, when like news comes in bulletins and then you never see that piece of news again. Like we're expected, if something happens now in Beijing, we expect to know about it. Say a global international event happens, we're supposed to know about that within minutes sometimes, because of social media, because of this collapse of space and time. And I think that's what I've been told that Robert had been thinking about with his work, that the wires have gone into the air, the space has gone, the time has changed, and everything is hectic. And for me, that felt like that was about it made me think more about some of the stuff I was already thinking about or dealing with, which is just how social media and my relationship with social media was hard to grasp, because it's just seemingness. It's just you pull it out of your pocket and you're on it, or even if you don't go on it, people seem to be talking about it. The world is influenced by it. My social world, my age group where I was at, they were influenced by that. That's where we found our events, that's where we advertised our events, that's where we showed our holiday pictures, that's where your mum argues with your aunt. Like, it's just, it's part of contemporary life. And I think I sensed that was becoming, it was becoming a relationship that I wanted to think about more. And one of the reasons And one of the things I wanted to do really was to make it physical. So if the wires have gone into the air, can we bring them back again? Can we touch them now? Because we need to think about this. We need to think about how it influences us, how it makes us feel, and when it's invisible, when we can't pull, when it news is beamed in at us at all points all the time. It made me feel like I was being rained on all the time with data, endless digital data pulling me out of and I was and what I wanted a little bit was to set boundaries and to shield myself from that, and that really is the sort of starting place for the idea behind Media Storm. It was to sort of express that experience of being rained on by digital data. So the first sort of steps I took was just to make a note of how I felt every time I logged on and logged off, and just sort of bring a bit of consciousness to it. And what I began to think about was the relationship between sort of the wires going into the air, as Robert started us with, but also how our understanding of mental health developed with the use of the computer and with technology. So I thought about the sort of cognitive behavioural approach to psychology, counselling and mental health, which is often one that's sort of fronted in Western European. It's quite popular in certain parts of Western Europe, so in England, for example. And I was thinking about particularly the relationship between the definition of depression within that understanding, because let's think about depression as culturally specific. So within psychology, there's always different approaches, different methods, different ideas. But if I was to think about cognitive behavioural therapy, which really progressed when the wires of when we were thinking about how do we make a computer think, how do we make AI think, we started to think about, well, are these patterns, are these circuits, is that how we think? Or is there something in that that's related to our brains? Because, there's people love a system. So what I thought about was, there's a definition, there's a triangle that you might have seen around, and it's a definition of depression, and it's just one, but it's quite a popular one. And it's basically negative feelings about yourself, negative feelings about your future, and negative feelings about the world, and feeling that essentially for 6 months, or like for across periods and across contexts, is sometimes a sign that you might be experiencing depression, clinical depression. And I was thinking about that circuit of negative feelings about yourself, and I was thinking about social media and how we compare ourselves with everybody else and how everyone's putting out their best pictures. And then I was thinking about that circuit of negative feelings about other people, and I was thinking about social media, and I was thinking about how I'm seeing like this really strong Brexit rhetoric coming in over my social circles quite a lot, like lots of anti-immigration and racism and nastiness and how close that makes it feel to you, but how you, in terms of in terms of it being immediate all the time, but not something that's sort of like easily acted on in an authentic way. So I was thinking about negative feelings about other people, I was thinking about negative feelings about myself, and negative feelings about the future, and the sense of time that can be distorted when we're expecting our news immediately, all the time. And mostly I was thinking about negative feelings about the world, and I was thinking about algorithms, and I was thinking about how there's an idea that we can get trapped within negative thought circles, and that's a lot of what I understand sort of cognitive behavioural approaches can think about, how we can get trapped into circles and it can distort our perspective of reality. So we might think that we might catastrophize, for example. So, I'm going to do really badly at this talk. Everybody's going to see this. Nobody's going to employ me again. So, like, you know, and it sort of spins round a little bit in your mind. And I'm just to put in a late disclaimer, I'm not a therapist. I did a master's in social and community psychology. I'm a big psychology nerd, but a jack of all the psychology trades. I probably don't know. I know a little bit of everything at a very minor level. So if you're seeing this and thinking I'm misrepresenting, I am sorry. I am just talking about the influences of this piece for me. So, and I thought about algorithms and mental health and the idea, and I wondered about how social media algorithms factor into that. If you're stuck into a negative thought cycle where you're thinking about the world being a bad place, but maybe you're politically active. In my case, like I was struggling with the curation or lack of on Facebook. It seems to be like it lacked, like a newsfeed lacked empathy or logic, really. So I was struggling with these sort of like funny tensions between sort of like soothing cat pictures and really racially or politically or ideologically polarizing bits of information just stuck together. And I think when you're somebody that draws their information in associative ways rather than in linear ways, which means that you're more impacted perhaps by all of the information around the thing that you're looking at, because maybe your attention's not necessarily completely focused on that thing in front of you as much as it's taking in the whole. So I wonder if social media influences an ADHD mind in a different way. So I was thinking about all of those things, and I was thinking about what it was that I struggled with, and if my relationship with social media was a physical thing, what would it be? What would I need it to be? And I thought about it being an umbrella, and I wanted it to be an umbrella because I feel like data was raining on me all the time, and the algorithms in my mind that were telling me that I'm, like, giving me negative thoughts about myself, giving me negative thoughts about my future, but also about the world, will also be mirrored in the social media algorithms, because we're almost interconnected now. So when I click on a charity aid thing for, I'm not sure, some kind of activism, I don't want to, like to say I might donate to a certain charity off an advert, and then I'm seeing every other advert that comes from that's sort of related to that, because somebody's decided that, this is a person that cares about this. But that also means that beaming into my feed and into my pocket and into my mind at any point in the day are images of hungry children and war and genocide and really difficult negative things about the world, and that's echoing in your experiences of depression anyway, where you're struggling to take the filter off almost of feeling like there's nothing positive in the world anymore, and that you're not going to feel positive in the world anymore, and that there's nothing for your future. and that there's nothing, and that you don't feel good in yourself as well. And then not feeling good in myself is the lack of being able to act, to see pain and not being able to act on that pain and support that, because it's so passing that there's this problem, but they're just blinking in at you, and it's almost a bit destabilizing to be like, here is an issue, here is an issue, here is an issue, here's a picture of my cat, here's an issue, here's a picture of my cat, like, here's my food, here's my ex-boyfriend, here's my ex-girlfriend, here's a picture of my cat. So I think what I needed and what I wanted was something that would shield me a little bit further from that rain of information. So I thought about an umbrella, and I thought about weather, and I thought about how I need to hold on to this relationship with my social media, how I need to think about making that more conscious, understanding how it makes me feel. And then I also need to represent, or I want to represent, what it feels like to live in an age of data. And at that time, really, because if there's one thing social media is it's current. Like rain, you know? Like, if you go outside and something rains on you and there's a storm, it's happening only then and only now, and it can't happen again in the same way. And that's the context for the next video that I'm going to show you. And it's a short film of an umbrella that's got lights that run down it that respond to an audio, and you'll hear the audio, and the lights run down the umbrella, and you can see my face against a dark setting, and it's lit by a blue screen of my face, of my phone.
Okay. All right. That was great. Thanks, Holly. Really interesting to hear about the background to Media Storm. I loved the poem. As a poet myself, I was really refreshed to hear that you used that as a starting point in the creative process. But, I should perhaps start here by introducing your collaborator, Richard Redwin.
Hello.
Hi, Richard. Richard's a light and sculpture artist who fit the sound responsive LED lights and headphones into umbrellas for the installation when it was shown in Arts City in Stoke last year. So, Richard, can you start us off by telling us a bit about your practice and your input into the making of Media Storm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a multidisciplinary artist working out of Stoke-on-Trent. I do a lot of different art forms just to get paid. You know, I could never really afford to just pick one thing to do. I have fallen into doing a lot more sort of a lantern building and light-based artworks, just because they look great and it's very accessible as well for people who maybe aren't, versed in art. Like you can always appreciate something beautiful. So yeah, I kind of got into doing some light up masks for DJs on a couple of occasions, which was really fun, and that led me to sort of find out a bit more about using LED strips and programming them to sound react.
So And how did you go about syncing the sound and light?
I cheated a little bit. So you can get your own chip like an Arduino and program responses for specific sounds. But actually, there's quite a lot of pre-programmed chips available online now with a set of sort of pre-programmed responses. And obviously, the most important thing for us with the project was that there's just a sort of a visible reaction, and so I was able to get that from using some pre-programmed chips that are just that come with like a Bluetooth connection to your phone and an app, and you can sort of set some really interesting reactions without having to know too much about programming. So that was good for me.
It's really effective. Holly, I need to mention here that the soundscape, the full soundscape, is available on your SoundCloud channel, so people can search for Holly Norcop on SoundCloud and they'll come across the Media Storm.
Yeah, it's under hashtag Media Storm. So because it's 11.5 minutes long, it felt a bit cheeky to pop it in today. I know everybody's late. I know it's late, but it does build. So I've just sort of whacked in a sort of little sample, but you're very welcome to listen to the whole thing because I think it's a lot more exciting and interesting at the end, if I'm honest. But we got the sound reaction is sort of more clear visually from the beginning. One of the biggest challenges was just trying to work out how to make it waterproof, like from Richard's side. I think you got there though. Did you use glue and a hairdryer?
I mean, there was a little bit of hot glue and a heat gun. I mean, it's fundamentally a hairdryer, but you wouldn't want to use it on your hair.
Yeah.
There was a lot of heat shrink tubing. So I'm threading all the lights through a tube and then heating the tube so it all shrinks around it and seals the ends. Yeah, that was making something that was entirely waterproof from and self-contained. Yeah, that was
that's the main thing, wasn't it?
Working from home, and it was all takeaway containers and sealable stuff.
To put the headphones in, so we had a takeaway container attached to the handle, and then like sealed LEDs going down the thing, so if it rained, it would still work. So that's all Rich's hard work, really.
DIY or die,
Yeah.
The DIY sounding element of this, it sounds quite something. I was going to ask you, Holly, about the soundscape itself, and I was interested in how you chose the incidental sounds that went in
Yeah.
the soundscape. I think you described it as being the sort of the product of an ADHD mind.
Yeah, it was. So I think throughout the process, I really wanted to look at my relationship with social media and how it was making me feel. I wanted to make it a bit more, I wanted to be more mindful of that relationship. So after every time I use social media, I'd write just a couple of words and then and what so of how I felt and what triggered those words. And then from that, that was how I chose and selected material. And I did that over this period of about 2 weeks. So and I didn't for the and that's for like the stuff that was like quite specific and political. So I think one of the things I was trying to balance in my mind at the time was really disengaging from politics because I just mentally needed to take a step back and like feeling like if you can carry on disengaging, then you're part of the problem um one way or another. So like yeah, so one of the sort of ingredients was created through these things like there's towards the end of the soundscape there's things like it's a sound of crying children that have been separated from their parents on the Mexican to American border during in Donald Trump's time. And the stuff that I was pulling was like stuff that had come through that day. So it's really like, and it was about like that noise of just trauma and how it just sort of leaks into our day-to-day life. And amongst that there was also sort of there was waves, the sounds of waves, and Boris Johnson's sort of statements about how the weather might be nice, but we'll send you back, which is quite like what I felt was quite patronising, and how these sort of balanced with just like the day-to-day sort of interlacing of life. And the relationship of ADHD is quite an interesting one. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but ADHD and autism both often have secondary sort of related conditions, and one of them is called sensory processing disorder. Um, and the way that that works from like an audio perspective is, say if I was in a room with lots of people and we were chatting, and we were it's called the cocktail party effect. A neurotypical brain, a typical brain would be able to, if we were having a conversation, would be able to focus in on that person in front of you, but I hear all of the noise. So I can't hear what's in front of me. I hear the whole effect, right? And I think that that constant chatter from social media can sometimes sound like that really loud, sort of overwhelming cocktail party effect if I can hear everything, so I can't follow one narrative. Because if we're in a world where we're thinking about our attention, and it's, I can't remember who coined the term attention economy, but since capitalism and marketing, everybody is after your attention all the time. So what does that mean if you've allegedly got a deficit of it? I mean, I don't believe that ADHD is a deficit of attention. I think it's just a different kind of attention. I think it's an attention that works from an associative matter. It takes in the whole rather than a linear approach. And that's kind of why working with audio was really interesting. It was my first time doing it. And while working with audio as a female with ADHD was really exciting, because it's the first time I could remaster and remake those experiences. So often if I'm at a party, even with mates and we're in a noisy environment, I just can't take part. Like I don't understand what's being said. And I think when you're experiencing mental health issues, that chatter can be internalized, and again you can feel quite isolated. So it's sort of the two things interacted for me.
Wow, it's really interesting. It's kind of very complicated. I've not heard of the cocktail party effect.
The cocktail party, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Look that up. Is there a kind of psychology behind that?
Yeah, I think so. So actually, like, I just need to put again a disclaimer in. So I did a master's in social and community psychology. So I pulled it from that. And actually we talk about the cocktail party effect in A levels, so it's not particularly sophisticated. But it's from personal experience that I really draw and speak from. But I always think about my attention as if it's like, if you imagine a spotlight, and your spotlight is just tighter. Do you know what I mean? So you can move your spotlight because it's a lighter, more directed attention. Whereas my spotlight's big, heavy, like ball. And like when I move it, I can move it, but it takes a lot of energy to move it because it's heavy. And also it's not precise, it's wide, it will light up the whole stage. So that's sort of like my experience of socializing, and it's also my experience of taking on information. And that's why the excess of information can be quite overwhelming.
I've had a question here come from Callum Bradso via Facebook, and Callum says that they relate to the mass of data. I think that's something that everyone can relate to, actually. But he asks, how does being dyslexic challenge or enhance your poetry?
Yeah, my relationship with words is a love-hate relationship, definitely. And I think actually this is the first time I've ever shared my poetry in a public forum, so I'm really nervous about this talk. And I think one of the reasons I haven't done that is because the early experiences of handing over work that's ever been written has always been at school, and when it comes back, it's all crossed out and it's in red and it's wrong, effectively. And I think that relationship's a complicated one, but and I think for words though, like I think again it comes back to being able to like work in an associative way. Like, and I think if you're finding that you're overwhelmed with information, there's something about poetry that strips it all back and you just manage to get a feeling out. And I think it's in some countries, in preschools and infant schools, they teach feelings to children, like the language of feelings. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to address more in our culture, that we talk about and understand and process how we feel. And I do feel like that's a language. And I think for me, having poetry is one way of getting words out quickly, getting feelings out quickly, because otherwise I'd have to write a lot like a journal, and that would be just hard work, basically. So it's definitely therapeutic. And I know I've got a lot of friends that are carers during this time, and I know that when they come away from a difficult shift, they're doing the same thing. And I think I'm not alone in experiencing needing to express something quickly and in a precise way. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I have a very kind of similar relationship to poetry. It's kind of, there's a kind of like a deep need to write and to create. There's a question here from Trish Wheatley. She says, that was great, thanks. Has making the artwork changed your relationship with social media for the better? Do you feel you understand social media more?
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah. So one thing that I did was I ran a couple of workshops of community groups where I asked them what if their relationship with social media was a physical thing, what it would be, and just listening to other people's interactions and responses was really interesting. And then I think over time, mine became a mirror rather than an umbrella, and I think I now use it as a way to. I'm more intentionally mindful when I use social media of how I'm feeling afterwards. And I know now that if I'm not feeling strong, then I'm not going to go on social media, because I think it's a reflection of how I feel. And like, because of those algorithms and that interconnected relationship that I talked about, you know, you've got algorithms, potentially something that reflects within your mind as well. So if I go on media and I'm finding it's a sensitive situation and I come away and I'm not feeling very well anymore, like mentally, I now see that as an early sign that I need to not only come off social media, but I do need to step back and look after myself and my well-being a little bit more. So I now consider it to be a mirror of where I'm at and as a check-in point.
That's really interesting. I kind of got to a point in my relationship with social media, especially after some really horrendous incidents on Facebook, that I kind of decided that I would use it as a space to record stuff for myself. And the fact that it's kind of being shared is sort of incidental. And that's kind of when I turned to Instagram more, because of its visual nature, and you know, it's I kind of use it like a diary, really.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that. And so that analogy of it being a mirror is it's really quite interesting. Do you have kind of favorite platforms that you've turned to on social media? Or do you have a kind of strategy for using social media? Which platforms do you kind of relate to?
So like, as a dyslexic person, it's always easier on Instagram rather than Facebook because it's just literally less reading, writing. So that's always helpful, and it's a nicer format in terms of the curation of information. Like I can follow one hashtag, or I don't have to look at genocide next to a picture of my neighbour's cat in the same way, and I think that that's less confusing for me.
Yeah.
But I do think just each to their own. Like it's not that social media itself is a, you know, like we're in control of it to an extent because we can choose not to take part. And I think for me it's more about like I just wanted to process really like what digital information, how to sort of manage that political engagement with the sort of day-to-day life of social media as well, and really just feel like I can grasp that, because I think one of the most complicated things is that like this information, even if you're not on social media, it shapes our social worlds, and we can't touch it anymore. We can't, you know, it's not a phone, it's not so it's really just about being mindful and understand, and like because of the way that it's been designed, it's almost unconscious. It's a learned habit, and I'm not against it. I just think it should be more, for me it needs to be something that I'm more aware of, and yeah, that's, you know, so we're more mindful of how it affects us on our day-to-day lives.
I agree, absolutely. It's that the kind of disembodied nature of it is a real problem, because it becomes unconscious the way that we kind of relate to it. Kind of moving on, I wondered if you plan to use the research that you've kind of taken on through Media Storm project into further projects, and I wonder what you've been working on more recently.
Yeah, do you want to take this first, Rich? Do you want me to do it?
Just me personally, I'm sort of moving into well, as we come out of lockdown. We came out of lockdown a while now. God, it's all blurring together this year. But we're looking at ways to COVID-proof sort of big outdoor events. A lot of things that would have been very interactive and highly workshop-based are becoming sort of more like a series of installations, which is completely in my wheelhouse. But
it's in Stoke, Richard. Yeah,
that's in Stoke. Yeah, so in Stoke-on-Trent, I'm working on a event called Tomorrow's Garden, which will be in the weekend of the 8th in Stoke-on-Trent. If anyone's dropping by, which will be a series of light installations and a kind of a story.
That's next January, isn't it?
That is, yeah, this coming January.
8th to 10th January.
Yeah. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting challenge as an artist and an organizer, but it's exciting to see the kind of the things that we'll be coming up with.
Cool.
Hopefully, lots of sound reactive light installations in the vein of Media Storm.
Yeah, one of the challenges we've got to work out is how we're going to use the umbrellas at some point in the future. We were using headphones before, so it's how to make that safer for the public again. So with it being an umbrella, it could be, within the 2 meter distance, but we're not sure on how to make that a sort of. So at some point, technically, we'd like to work on that. For me, this is the first time using audio was this commission, and it was the first time I went into a recording studio, the first time that I edited, and I found it really exciting. I loved it as a sort of medium for like lots of different reasons. One of them because of that interaction of sound that I can now mimic in a way that I couldn't with other forms. So like with this idea of overlapping and overwhelming sounds, like that feels so much closer to a sort of an autistic or ADHD experience than what I've heard before. So I love that as a piece, and I love working with sound. And then because of that, I think I recently got a commission working with a sound artist. And I was their creative producer, and we were doing a research and development commission for an NPO locally in Stoke-on-Trent called B Arts, and we were exploring how to work with people during lockdown and during COVID-19 restrictions, and how to reach into disabled and shielding communities and sort of work in a participatory manner. And through that, we started sort of partnering with the befriending services and reaching and speaking to people that are at the most risk of COVID-19 and exploring with them what care meant to them during this time, and really just hearing their voices, and then using some of that material. Harry used some of that material. So I wasn't editing, I was almost in a different box there. I was really building up the relationships to sort of create a soundscape that's called that we've called the soundscape of the shielded, and it's been accepted into a conference called it's a catchy title. It's called the Music Mediation Disability Representation and Access Conference. It's a lot, but
Cool.
it's and it's on the 22nd of November. And it's going to be exploring how, and that's literally talking about how musicians and sound artists work with disabled and people during this time in lots of different fields. So I'm really hoping to carry on working in audio, and I hope that me and Rich have got hopes that at some point in the future we'll be able to show these umbrellas in like a curated sort of sound, and like maybe creating like a physical representation of a news feed where people can walk through and see the sort of interactions of the lights, but not hear the input of what's been going in, which is sort of what you see when you have like when you're on your social media feeds and you can't hear what's coming into a human being, but you can see what's coming out. So one day we'll be able to do that again. We were hoping to show them in some future light nights, but we're going to work with the restrictions and see where we get up to.
Yeah. Look forward to that, Holly. There's been a few more comments that Trish says the mirror analogy is really helpful, and Daniel Wheatley said, wonderfully put, Holly, thank you. I think that's kind of all we've got time for. So I just want to say a big thank you to Holly Norcop and to Richard Redwin, and to everybody who's joined us for this discussion about Media Storm. It's been really good to hear your take on social media, and I think it's really important to kind of keep on thinking about how we use it and how we relate to it, so that it doesn't overwhelm us. It's here to stay, whether we like it or not. So yeah, thanks ever so much. We've pasted a link to feedback forms on our artist presentations on YouTube and on Facebook, and we'd appreciate your help by filling those in. We have another artist presentation next Wednesday, the 7th of October at 3 p.m. As part of the hashtag Go Red for Dyslexia campaign. We're broadcasting a pre-recorded presentation of artist Benedict Phillips' rereading of his manifesto, The Agenda of the Aggressive Dyslexic, 25 years after I first published it in Disability Arts in London magazine. So
Amazing.
I'm really looking forward to that, and we'll see you again then. Thanks again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody. Thanks again. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.